I had just parked outside my son's house, warm rosemary casserole still steaming beside me when my phone buzzed. 8 words. No greeting. No explanation. Just cold, clinical truth. Don't come in. Rachel doesn't want you here. I didn't knock. I didn't text back. I just stood there, staring through the window at the family dinner I'd been uninvited from, watching them laugh, clink glasses, pass plates like a perfect family rhythm. And there I was, a man holding a dish no one wanted, standing on the doorstep of a house I had paid for. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button because this story is about to take a turn that will shock you. What I felt wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something quieter, like a door closing slowly behind me, like a lock clicking that I hadn't realized existed. I wasn't just excluded from dinner. I was erased from the very idea of being needed. The evening sky was shifting into that deep blue that comes just before darkness settles in like a final decision. I looked down at the casserole, the towel wrapped carefully over the handles, steam still faintly rising at the edges. I had used rosemary from my backyard, cut fresh that morning. Rachel used to say she loved it when I cooked the old way. Cast iron, garlic pressed by hand, slow, quiet meals. At least she said that in the early years, before the edges started to fray. I turned back toward my truck without making a sound. The driveway gravel barely shifted beneath my feet, like even the ground had been told not to acknowledge me. I set the dish gently on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel, not starting. Not right away. It wasn't sadness that filled me, not bitterness. It was something older and more settled. The feeling of being unnecessary, of becoming furniture. 12 minutes later, I was back home. Same porch light flickering. Same porch swing hanging slightly crooked from storm watch. I opened the door, the casserole still intact, and walked in quiet. My house isn't large, but it carries echoes. Every footstep reminds me that these walls were once filled with more. My late wife, Catherine, used to call our pause button a space where we could breathe and reset. Now it feels more like the final page of a long chapter, carefully written but barely read. I placed the dish on the counter and didn't bother with the fridge. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the table, hands folded, listening to nothing. It's remarkable what silence can say when you stop trying to fill it. I stared at the towel, covering the dish like it held answers, but all it held was heat slowly fading away, like intention unreceived. After a while, I went to the study and opened the top drawer of my old oak desk, the one with the scratch on the side from when Lucas, age 8, tried to help build something like Dad. Inside was a folder labeled simply Harrison Family Financial Support. Thick, worn, full of dates, transfers, and confirmations. Every time I said yes, every time I stepped in quietly, willingly. Page 1, $220,000 down payment on their house. My pension, my wife's life insurance. It was never officially a loan. Lucas had promised, "We'll add your name to the deed, Dad. Just once we're settled. It's your home, too." It never happened, and I never pushed because fathers don't ask for titles. They just show up until they're told not to. Page 3, $8,000 for Rachel's dental surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover it because it was more cosmetic than medical. She didn't ask directly, just let the topic hang in the air until I volunteered. I always did. Page 7, $12,500 for Lucas's green building certification. He dropped out halfway through the course, never finished. Said it was too theoretical. Page 11, $3,800 for Benjamin's tutoring program. He's struggling in math, Dad, and we just can't fall behind. Page 15, $14,000 for Emma's violin summer camp. The only expense I never questioned because Emma, unlike the others, still looked me in the eyes when she said thank you. The folder held 73 pages. Each one was a quiet admission that I'd bought more than groceries and lessons. I'd bought relevance, access, a seat at the table. Or so I thought. Around midnight, I made coffee, the real kind, black, no sugar. Sleep wasn't coming, and I didn't want to wait for it. I took my mug and sat back at the desk, flipping through a small leather journal I hadn't written in for months. On the first blank page, I wrote, "There's a moment when love becomes a transaction. Most people never notice it until the bill arrives." I stared at those words for a long time, not because I doubted them, but because I knew they were overdue. Some debts don't involve money, and there are bankruptcies no court can process. I thought of Catherine. What would she say? She always had a way of seeing through clutter, of saying the truth without sharpness. She'd probably sit across from me, pour her own cup, and say, "Walter, don't let them take your quiet away. That's the last thing they haven't spent yet." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I simply sat still. And in that stillness, I decided. No announcements, no speeches, no confrontation. Just one decision after another. Quiet ones, paper ones, legal ones. Because dignity doesn't shout. It signs documents. I woke up early the next morning, before the robins, shaved, pressed a clean shirt, and drove to the bank I'd used for 23 years. The teller recognized me, asked how the grandkids were. I smiled, told her they were growing fast, and asked to speak with a senior officer. A woman named Marie took me into a glass room, polite and professional. I slid a slip of paper across the table listing every account where Lucas had power of attorney, every automatic payment linked to their household. "I'd like to revoke all of this," I said calmly, "and suspend every outgoing transfer until further notice." She looked surprised. "Is everything all right, Mr. Harrison?" "Everything's finally clear," I said. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with the casserole still untouched. I thought about throwing it out, but somehow it felt wrong, like erasing evidence. So I kept it there beside me, like a reminder of rosemary, of rituals, of the day my seat at the table disappeared, not with shouting, but with silence. I didn't tell Lucas what I'd done. I didn't need to. He'd find out the next time the mortgage bounced, or when the auto draft for Benjamin's tuition failed to clear. He'd call. He'd ask. He'd say, "Dad, something's wrong with the account." And I would say, "No, son. Something's finally right." Because this isn't revenge. It's reclamation. Of peace, of pride, of presence. They made it clear I wasn't part of the family picture anymore. I'm simply stepping out of the frame they've already cropped me out of. And the funny thing is I don't even mind. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, I opened the folder again, not because I needed to, but because there's a particular pain that demands to be reread. Some people relive betrayal through old voicemails, through photos with eyes that no longer look at them the same way. Me, I had ledger entries, wire transfers, check stubs. Silent evidence of how love had been itemized over the years. Each page a receipt for being needed, but never truly seen. The sun had barely broken past the oak tree in my backyard. A thin stream of light fell across the desk like a courtroom spotlight. And in that light sat everything I had given. $220,000 for the house, itemized in bank statements like an afterthought. Just one line on a list of many, but that line had rewritten my entire retirement. $12,000 for Rachel's certification course in something I still can't pronounce. $4,800 for a kid-friendly backyard upgrade, complete with synthetic grass and a pre-built swing set, so they wouldn't have to drive the kids to the park anymore. I remembered helping install it that summer, knees in the gravel, sunburn on the back of my neck, while Lucas stood under the shade scrolling his phone, only occasionally glancing up to say, "Looking good, Dad." I flipped deeper into the file. A check for $9,300 for emergency roof repair. I remember the call. Rachel had sounded distressed, saying water had leaked into Benjamin's room during storm. "We don't feel safe sleeping here tonight," she'd said, voice trembling just enough. I paid the contractor directly. No questions, no conditions, just the reflex of a man raised to believe that when your child says they're in trouble, you answer with action. It never occurred to me that trust could be a currency and that I'd been spending it at a loss. Then came the medical bills, premium health plans for Rachel and the kids not covered through their jobs. I had offered to help just until Lucas's promotion kicks in. That promotion, as far as I know, never came. But the monthly drafts continued quietly, like a heartbeat I'd stopped noticing. There were preschool fees, summer programs, holiday flights, grocery deliveries, electric bills, and even a payment to a dog groomer for a golden retriever I'd never met. Some pages made me pause, not because of the amount, but the memory. A $1,200 birthday dinner for Rachel's mother at a vineyard 2 counties over. They had invited Rachel's family, her colleagues, even her yoga instructor. I wasn't on the guest list, but I was on the bill. There was a rhythm to it all, a pattern. They'd call or text, not with the directness of a request, but with the vague implication. We're just stretched thin this month. The water heater's acting up. Benjamin's school was recommending a new specialist, and each time, my response had been as predictable as that. I sent the money. I sent the money because I believed that fathers don't do school. But what I didn't realize, what I'd been too proud, too stubborn, or maybe too afraid to admit, is that someone else had been keeping score all along. And somewhere along the way, the points had stopped counting for love and started counting for control. I closed the folder slowly, as if afraid to wake something up. Then I sat back, staring at the walls of my study. It's a small room, wood paneled with the faint smell of old books and lemon oil. On one shelf sat photos. Lucas's high school graduation, Emma in her orchestra uniform, Catherine holding Benjamin on the day he was born. None of them recent. None of them framed in anything newer than a decade. The photos hadn't changed, but the people in them had. And maybe I had too, quietly, slowly, without announcement, like ink fading from a checkbook you've used too many times. By mid-morning, I was ready. I took the folder and drove to the bank, not to revoke anything yet, but to request a full list of every active payment tied to my accounts. The teller was polite, professional. She didn't ask why I needed it, just printed everything and handed it to me in a blue envelope. 174 transactions. Monthly, quarterly, annually. Some as small as $14.99 for an app subscription. Some as large as $3,800 for their mortgage. I held the envelope like it was a letter from someone I used to be. Back home, I spread the papers across the kitchen table, one page for each commitment. I read them like a detective, like a stranger, trying to understand the man who had allowed this to happen. And what I found, more than anything, was consistency. The payments had never stopped. Not when I got sick 3 winters ago. Not when I missed Thanksgiving 2 years in a row. Not when Catherine's anniversary passed without so much as a phone call from my son. They had stopped seeing me, but they never stopped seeing the money. I was no longer a father. I was infrastructure. And the thing about infrastructure is people only notice it when it fails. That evening, I called Harold, my lawyer, my friend, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Harold, I said, I need to talk about restructuring a few things. His voice was calm, familiar. You finally ready to draw a line, Walt? I paused, then said no. I'm ready to move the whole fence. We scheduled an appointment for later in the week. No urgency, no drama, just the slow, methodical beginning of something new. Not revenge, not punishment, just recalibration. Later that night, Lucas called. First time in weeks. I didn't answer. I watched the phone ring on the counter, the screen lighting up like a flare from a ship that had long since left the harbor. A voicemail came through. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to. I knew the tone, knew the rhythm. Something about a mistake. Something about, don't take it personally, Dad. It was just a bad night. Rachel was tired. But I had already heard that song. Too many verses, always the same chorus. Instead, I wrote in my journal. One line. They said I was family until family meant showing up when it wasn't convenient. I thought about all the small moments I had excused. The missed birthdays, the silent holidays. The way Rachel's face tightened when I offered parenting advice, like I was stepping into territory she had already claimed. The way Lucas stopped calling me Dad and started saying, hey man. I thought it was just modern habits, life moving on. But now I think it was erosion. Slow, steady, invisible until you look down and realize the ground beneath you is gone. And yet through it all, I kept paying, kept supporting, kept pretending that being needed was the same as being loved. But love doesn't come with invoices, and it doesn't send text messages telling you to stay outside. The next morning, I made a list, not of what I'd given, but of what I'd allowed, where I had turned down the volume on my own needs, where I had given silence in place of boundaries, where I had mistaken compliance for compassion. And at the bottom of the list, I wrote, "It's not too late to end the contract." Because that's what it had become, hadn't it? A contract, one I had never signed, but honored anyway. A contract where the fine print read, "In exchange for access to your grandchildren, your son, and the illusion of inclusion, you agree to forfeit your time, your dignity, and your savings." Well, no more. The payments would stop, quietly, completely, without warning. Because the people who noticed them most weren't the ones who deserved them. And the man who had made them deserved better. What happened next would change everything. There's something ceremonial about sitting in a lawyer's office. The way the chairs never quite fit. The way the clock ticks just loud enough to be heard, but not enough to be noticed. The way the air feels filtered, pre-approved, as if even the oxygen has been screened for liabilities. I hadn't seen Harold in almost 18 months, but he looked the same. Gray hair pulled back, glasses perched low, ties slightly loosened in the way that says he stopped trying to impress people a long time ago. He stood up when I walked in and said, "You finally came." I nodded, sat down across from him, and placed the folder on the table with the precision of someone placing evidence before a judge. Harold didn't ask questions, not right away. He just poured me coffee, black, no cream, and waited for me to speak. I opened the folder and slid the stack of documents toward him. "These are all the payments I've made to Lucas and his family over the last 6 years. Mortgage assistance, private school, medical expenses, upgrades, subscriptions, groceries, you name it. All for me, quietly, regularly, without strings." Harold raised an eyebrow as he flipped through the pages. "This is extensive. 174 transactions," I said evenly. "That's not support anymore. That's payroll." He smirked, but there was no amusement in it, just acknowledgement. Then I reached into the folder again and pulled out one more paper, the one that mattered more than all the others. A copy of the deed to the house Lucas and Rachel lived in, dated 6 years ago, co-signed by me. The ownership listed, Walter Harrison, sole title holder. No transfer, no secondary owner, no trust. Just one name. Harold leaned back slightly, took a slow breath, and said, "So you never gifted the property?" I shook my head. They kept saying we'd change it later, make it official, add Lucas's name. But it never happened, and I never pushed because I thought, I'll let the words trail off. You thought that love and gratitude would take care of it. I thought they'd remember. The words tasted sour, like disappointment that had aged into something tougher. Harold tapped the paper with one finger. "So legally, it's still yours. Every brick, every faucet, every square inch of it." "That's right. And you want to?" He let the sentence hang like an open door. I looked him straight in the eye. "I want to end the performance. I want to revoke Lucas's power of attorney, stop all linked transactions, change my will, and initiate the groundwork to reclaim full control over the property. Quietly, without confrontation, just with certainty." Harold didn't flinch. He just nodded again, this time slower, more thoughtfully, and started making notes. "You'll need to sign a few forms, update your estate documents. We'll file the revocation with the bank and insurance providers. As for the house, if it's in your name, you can list it, sell it, lease it, or move in tomorrow, and no one can legally stop you." "That's good," I said, "because I want the option, not the action." "Yet, understood." He paused, then looked up again. "What changed, Walter?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know, but because I did. Exactly, word for word, framed by me. What changed was the way my son texted me, like I was a contractor. What changed was the moment I stood outside the house I paid for and saw my reflection in the window, faint, separate, relevant. What changed was the way the casserole pulled beside me. while my family poured wine and shared stories I was no longer welcome to. What changed was the realization that I had allowed this, that my silence had been mistaken for approval, that my generosity had been converted into expectation, and that my existence had become transactional. I took a breath and finally said, "They stopped seeing me, Harold, and I finally started seeing myself." He said nothing to that, just kept writing. We spent the next hour going over documents, updating signatures, canceling permissions, transferring access back to me. There was something deeply satisfying about the rhythm of it. Pen to paper, click of a folder, shuffle of pages. It felt like closing doors I hadn't realized had been left open for too long. Not slamming them, just easing them shut with finality. At one point, Harold pulled out an older copy of my will. "Right now," he said, "Lucas is your primary beneficiary. That includes the house, your savings, and your investment portfolio." "Not anymore," I said. "I want to create a living trust, one that excludes him and Rachel entirely. Leave a share for Emma, yes, but nothing for Lucas or his wife. And a portion to be donated to the Veterans Education Fund Catherine supported." She would have liked that. Harold made the changes without comment, though I saw the flicker of approval in his eyes. By the time I walked out of the office, the sun had shifted again, lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement. I felt lighter. Not happy, not triumphant, but lighter. Like someone had quietly lifted a bag I hadn't realized I was carrying for years. I drove home in silence. No radio, no news, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the occasional soft rattle of papers in the seat beside me. The house greeted me like it always did. Plain still, waiting. I made myself a sandwich, sat in my chair, turned on the lamp, and just breathed. That night, Lucas texted again, then called, then texted twice more. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to explain. The rules had changed. The arrangement had expired, and I wasn't going to renew it. I read the final text as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. It said, "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but the mortgage bounced. Call me." I dried my hands on a towel, put the phone face down, and went back to my book. For once, I chose not to respond to a crisis that wasn't mine. But the real surprise was still coming. A few days later, I got a certified letter from the bank confirming that all linked payments had been terminated. Lucas's access revoked, Rachel's accounts removed, the house confirmed in my sole name. And as I held the letter in my hands, something in me settled. Not loudly, not dramatically, just settled. Like water finding its level, like justice served at room temperature. They wouldn't know yet. Not fully. The payments were so quiet, so automated, that it would take time for the absence to register. But it would. It always does. You can ignore presence, but absence echoes. Absence temps. Absence is the debt collector that doesn't knock. It just waits. And me? I was done knocking too. It was the third Thursday of November when I truly understood what it meant to be erased while still standing in a room. Thanksgiving used to be our holiday, the one Catherine loved best. She had this ritual, you see. She'd start the cranberry sauce 2 days early because the flavor deepens in quiet, she'd say, as if cooking were a form of meditation. And in many ways it was. Our home would fill with warmth, not just from the oven, but from the years stacked on top of each other. 20 Thanksgivings in the same house, the same table, the same sequence of laughter, arguments, grace, and pie. Even after she passed, I kept the ritual alive. I didn't change the way I seasoned the stuffing. I still folded her apron over the back of the chair she used to sit in. It was my way of saying, "You're still here, even if I'm the only one who remembers." That year, Lucas said they were keeping it low-key. Rachel had family in town. Emma had an exam coming up. Benjamin had the flu. There was always a reason, but none of the reasons were ever, "We want you there, Dad." So I made a small turkey breast, just for me. Diced the onions slowly, lit a candle that had gathered dust since Catherine's passing, and set the table for one. I didn't play music, didn't turn on a football game, just sat there listening to the sound of my breath, wondering how silence could feel so heavy. The fork in my hand felt like lead. The cranberry sauce had no flavor. The chair across from me stayed empty, but it wasn't Catherine's absence that cut me that night. It was Lucas's, living 10 miles away and yet further than the moon. They never called. Not that day. Not even a text. That was the year I realized the invitations had stopped. Not because they forgot, but because they decided I had nothing left to offer. Not money, not childcare, not youth. Just memory. And memory makes people uncomfortable. After dinner, I rinsed the dishes, placed them in the drying rack, and sat in the dark for a long time. The candle burned down to a nub. The house smelled faintly of sage and something else, something like quiet grief. I didn't cry. Crying is for sudden loss. This was different. This was the kind of grief that settles into your bones like cold weather. Slow, creeping, permanent. The kind that doesn't knock you down but holds you in place year after year like roots twisted around your ankles. It wasn't always like this. I remember when Lucas was 10 and he made hand-drawn place cards for everyone at the table. Mine said, "World's Best Turkey Carver," with a little stick figure version of me holding a knife too big for his hand. He had drawn Catherine with a crown and Emma with fairy wings. We kept those cards for years. Somewhere in a box in the garage, I think they still exist. Evidence of a time when love didn't require scheduling and presence wasn't something that had to be negotiated. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The weight of the empty table still pressing against my chest. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and made tea. That's when I saw the blinking light on my laptop. An email. Not from Lucas, not from Rachel. From Emma. Subject line, "Hi, Grandpa." That was it. Just E. I clicked it open, not expecting much, but her words were simple, sincere, and sharper than anything I'd read in years. E. Grandpa. I don't know if anyone told you, but Thanksgiving dinner ended up being small this year. Dad said you were busy, but I didn't believe that. I kept expecting to see you walk in with your pie, like you always do. I missed you. Love, Emma. There it was. One sentence undid an entire season of silence. I missed you. 3 words. Unpolished, honest, like a hand reaching into cold water to find yours. I sat back and read the message again. Then a third time. She hadn't copied her parents, hadn't made excuses, hadn't even tried to soften the edge. She simply missed me. And suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be seen, not as an account number or a backup babysitter or a holiday convenience, but as someone worth noticing. The next morning, I replied carefully, gently, but with truth. Dear Emma, thank you for your message. It meant more than I can say. I wasn't busy. I wasn't invited. I hope your exam goes well. Love, Grandpa. I didn't try to guilt her, didn't say more than what was needed. Just enough for her to understand that what she sensed was correct. Something was broken, and I wasn't the one who broke it. Over the next few weeks, Emma started writing more. Little updates, stories about campus life, questions about Catherine's old recipes. At one point, she asked, "Can I come visit over winter break?" Just me. I said yes. No hesitation, no permission slips. Just yes. And when she came, she brought a pie. Not perfect, a little burn around the edges, but homemade with cinnamon, clove, and crushed so she rolled herself. We sat together in the kitchen, 2 people divided by a generation, but joined by something stronger. Remembrance, and the refusal to pretend everything was fine. She told me things, not all at once, but enough. Enough to know that Rachel had slowly reshaped the rules of the household, that Lucas had let it happen, that love in their home had terms in fine print, that appearances mattered more than presence, that sometimes Emma felt more like a resident than a daughter, and most painfully, that she'd heard them talk about me in clipped tones with eye rolls. He's too traditional. He doesn't understand boundaries. He means well, but he's too much. She said she used to defend me, but then she realized they weren't listening anyway. I didn't say much, just nodded. Let her speak. She wasn't asking for solutions. She was looking for someone who wouldn't explain her experience away. And I think she saw in me someone who understood what it meant to feel loyal to people who had stopped earning your loyalty. Before she left, she asked if she could take Catherine's recipe book with her, the handwritten one, full of stains and smudged ink and little notes in the margins. I said, of course, gave it to her with both hands. She held it like an heirloom, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like something I had passed down might survive the erosion. That night, after she left, I sat alone again. But it was a different kind of alone. Not hollow, not erased, just quiet. Like the end of a long conversation. I poured myself a drink, opened the fireplace, and sat beside the flames, letting their rhythm remind me that warmth doesn't always come from people. Sometimes it comes from the refusal to go cold yourself. The next morning, I woke early and pulled out another manila folder, this one labeled Estate. The time had come. Emma's honesty had moved something in me. Not resentment, not revenge, but a desire to protect what little remained of what I had built. Not just money, but legacy, intention, and most of all, truth. I called Harold and scheduled another meeting. We would change the will, and then I did something that would shock them all. The first thing I did was change the locks. Not the physical ones, but the kind most people don't think about. I called the bank and instructed them to remove all third-party access from my accounts. I revoked Lucas's power of attorney. I requested the closure of any joint instruments, credit links, or shared authorizations. No emotion, no explanation, just the calm, deliberate tone of a man finally reclaiming what he had allowed to be borrowed for too long. The woman on the line was polite. She asked if everything was all right. I said yes, and for the first time in years, I meant it. She told me there would be confirmation documents sent in the mail. I thanked her and hung up. It was strange, the satisfaction that came from such a simple act. A few keystrokes on her end, a few decisive words on mine, and yet it felt like I had just walked out of a room where I'd been held politely hostage for a decade. I went to my kitchen, made myself coffee, and stood at the window watching a pair of squirrels fight over nothing on the backyard fence. That's how it is, isn't it? We all scramble and protect what we think we've earned, even when it was never ours to begin with. And some of us, like me, spend years offering without conditions until we're told our presence has become inconvenient. That was the last time I would allow their comfort to be built on my quiet. I spent the next 3 days preparing the kind of exit that leaves no keys behind. I gathered every invoice, every receipt, every auto payment schedule, and every email confirming services tied to my accounts. Private school fees, subscription renewals, even the gas bill. Every detail had to be identified, cataloged, and severed. Not in anger, but in principle. I didn't want a war. I didn't need a scene. I simply refused to be the scaffolding of a structure that no longer welcomed me inside. I wrote formal notices, effective immediately. I am no longer responsible for the following accounts. I typed it again and again. It became a litany, a slow, satisfying rhythm, a mantra of personal boundaries wrapped in professional tone. I wasn't closing doors. I was locking them from the inside. On the 4th day, I met with Harold again. He handed me the new will, restructured, notarized, airtight. Lucas was no longer the beneficiary. Rachel was removed entirely. Benjamin would receive the state-required minimum. Emma, however, would receive the bulk, along with a note I had written in my handwriting to be delivered only if I was no longer here to say it aloud. "You were the one who still saw me," it said. "That is what earns legacy. Not blood, but vision." The rest of the estate would go to the education fund Catherine once championed. I liked the symmetry of that. My wife remembered through learning, my legacy reshaped by clarity. Harold looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "Most people don't do this until it's too late." I nodded. Most people wait to be pushed over the edge. I've just learned to step back before the cliff. And then came the final move. The house. The one Lucas and Rachel lived in. The one I paid for, legally owned, maintained, and protected, but was never welcome inside again. I didn't need to sell it. Not yet. That wasn't the plan. The plan was subtler, cleaner. I called a real estate attorney and asked for a title review. Quiet, confidential, routine. Once that was done, I requested the paperwork necessary to reclaim residential control. Not eviction, just intention, just alignment. Because you can't be excluded from what is legally, irrevocably yours. A week passed before the first signs of alarm reached my doorstep. Lucas called twice, left voicemails that danced between confusion and frustration. Dad, I think something's wrong with the mortgage portal. Our payment didn't go through. Did you switch banks? I didn't answer because I wasn't the landlord of their peace anymore. I was simply the man removing the scaffolding they'd leaned on without ever thanking the foundation. Then came the email from Rachel. Kurt, professional, performative. Walter, there seems to be a delay in the automatic transfers for the kids' school and household expenses. Can you please look into this? Not hi, Dad. Not hope you're well. Just a statement of disruption, an expectation of continued service. I read it once, closed the browser, and went outside to prune the rosemary bush. That Saturday, I visited the house. Not to enter, just to look. Just to remind myself of the shape of things. The shutters I helped install. The porch swing I bought one summer when Benjamin broke his arm and needed a place to sit while the other kids played outside. The bay window where Emma once practiced violin for hours while I sat on the steps and clapped like a man front row at Carnegie Hall. And now, the car wasn't in the driveway. The porch was clean. The windows were dark. I left no note. Just took a picture of the property with my phone. Framed, straight, documented. Sometimes you don't need confrontation. You just need proof of what is yours. Back home, I opened the photo and stared at it for a long while. Then I opened my email and began drafting a message to Harold. Subject line, next steps. By Monday, everything was ready. Every payment revoked, every authorization canceled, every legal tether cut. And still, I hadn't said a single word to them. That was the beauty of the plan. It was clean. It was lawful. It was silent. Silence, when wielded correctly, is not absence. It's power. It was the sound of a father no longer asking to be included. It was the sound of ownership. 2 days later, a delivery driver arrived at my door with a small envelope. Inside was an invitation to Benjamin's upcoming vacation. Rachel had handwritten, perhaps an attendance of "We'd love to have you join us," it said. The kid would be thrilled. No apology, no mention of the text I started. Just an attempt to reset the clock without acknowledging the time that had already passed. I didn't RSVP. I didn't go, because gestures without reckoning are just happy. Instead, that night, I sat by the fire, opened my journal, and wrote. When you take back what was always yours, don't explain it. They already know why. 3 weeks passed before the calls stopped. For before the emails dried up, I thought maybe that would be it. That silence would win. Not because it punished, but because it revealed. But on the 5th week, something else arrived. A letter from Emma, handwritten, 3 pages. It said, "Grandpa, I don't know everything that's happened, but I know something broke. I just want you to know that I see it. I see you. And if you ever want to talk, not about fixing it, not about going back, just to talk, I'm here. I miss the way you say things that no one else notices. I miss the quiet. I miss the steadiness. I hope you're okay. Love, Emma." That night, I didn't write back. I didn't need to. I knew she would reach out again because some people don't use silence as a wall. They use it as a door. And Emma, she still knew where to knock. I didn't go to Benjamin's birthday. I didn't send a gift either. What I did send, though, not wrapped or tied with ribbon, was an overnight courier envelope addressed directly to Lucas and Rachel, hand-delivered to their front door at precisely 6 p.m., just as they were lighting candles and posing for photographs they'd later post online with captions like, "Family means everything." I imagined them pausing at the door, party hats slightly askew, laughter fading as the delivery man handed over a thin white envelope requiring a signature. Not a package, not a box of toys. Just 3 sheets of paper titled plainly, "Notice of intent to list property for sale." No threats, no malice. Just a date, just a signature, just a truth made legal. The house they laughed in, The one I had paid for in full 15 years ago, remodeled after storm damage, refinanced in my name when Lucas's business failed. The house I was once welcomed into for Sunday dinners and backyard barbecues was still mine. Not in memory, not in sentiment, in law. And I had decided, finally, that my name would mean something again. The reactions came fast, like clockwork programmed by entitlement. First, the email. Long, panicked, defensive, full of phrases like surely a misunderstanding, and this could devastate the kids. Then the voicemail. Lucas's voice cracking in a way that didn't sound like grief, but panic. He didn't mention the casserole night. He didn't bring up the 8-word text. What he said was, "Dad, please, we need to talk. Don't do this." But we had talked. Not with words, with decisions. With silence. With the click of a lock no longer turned from my side. I listened to the voicemail twice. Once with my ears, once with my spine, because there's a kind of tension that travels not through sound, but through the nervous system. The tremble of a man who realizes his castle has no moat. Only borrowed land. By morning, Rachel had written again. This time, not an email. A printed letter slid into my mailbox like some reluctant olive branch. "Walter, I understand you're upset. We all make mistakes in a family. But surely this doesn't need to be so final. Think of Benjamin. Think of Emma. Think of the holidays. She always did that. Weaponized sentiment like a shield, wielded children as negotiation chips. But I'd already thought of them. I had thought of them when I stood outside that window with the rosemary casserole, invisible to the very people who still expected my bank account to show up, even when I couldn't. So I did something they didn't expect. I showed up, not to the party, not to the dinner table, but to the property itself. 2 days after the notice arrived, I scheduled a walkthrough with a realtor. 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. I wore a navy blue sweater, clean khakis, and polished shoes. I looked like a man visiting the home of a stranger, not the one who had funded every tile, every roof repair, every repainting of the porch that now hosted another man's laughter. The realtor was younger than I'd expected. Curious, respectful, a little puzzled. "They're still living here?" he asked. I nodded. Not for long. He took photos, room by room. Each picture a memory fossilized in pixels. The family portrait still hanging above the mantel. The kitchen island I'd custom built when Rachel insisted the open concept needed flow. The master bedroom with the fan I had installed myself one sweaty August night while Lucas watched football. All of it mine, but used like it never was. The realtor asked if we needed to inform the tenants. I corrected him gently. "Not tenants," I said. "Relatives. Temporary ones." We finished the tour in silence. I signed the preliminary paperwork on the hood of his car, the ink drying fast in the dry spring wind. I told him the listing would go live in 2 weeks. Enough time, not for them to convince me otherwise, but for them to remember how things came to be and why they were now ending. That night, I opened the old safe in my study and pulled out a photograph. Catherine and I, in front of our original house 25 years ago, holding baby Lucas in our arms, a sold sign behind us. We looked young, foolishly hopeful. I studied her smile. I missed the way her presence had always made my decisions sharper. Catherine had been many things, but indecisive was not one of them. She'd once told me, kindness is not the same as allowing disrespect. Know the line. Don't apologize for it. I hadn't understood that line until now. But I saw it clearly cutting across the foundation of that house, like a hairline fracture that had always been there, invisible until the pressure made it crack. The next day, Emma called. She didn't ask for answers. She asked if she could come over. No agenda, just time. I made lemon tea and sat with her on the porch swing, the same one her father used to rock her on when she couldn't sleep as a baby. Now she was taller, wiser, and in her silence, I saw all the questions she didn't ask. She looked at me and finally said, "I saw the sign in the yard. Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm not angry, Emma. I am awake. There's a difference." She stayed for an hour. We didn't dissect the past. We just sat, two people who hadn't erased each other. Later that week, I received a notice from a family mediator. Rachel had requested a sit down to clarify intentions and avoid disruption. The letter framed it as an olive branch, but I recognized it for what it was: a negotiation before consequences. I declined respectfully. No meeting was needed. I had already clarified my intentions. Through contracts, through signatures, through action. They called again. They begged. They offered to pay rent. I declined, not because I wanted to punish, but because renting requires agreement and we no longer agreed on what family meant. So the final notice was served. 30 days. Enough time to gather, to pack, to remember. I wasn't evicting them. I was unhooking myself from a life I was no longer invited to participate in. The day the listing went public, I received 3 offers. Above asking, cash buyers, no contingencies. The market was good, but I wasn't in it for the profit. I was in it for the punctuation. This wasn't revenge. This was grammar. The full stop after a sentence I didn't write. 1 week later, Lucas showed up at my door. No appointment, no letter. Just him standing there, face flushed, eyes searching. "Dad," he said, "please just tell me what I did that was so unforgivable." I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. It wasn't one thing, Lucas. It was the sum of many silences. Yours, mine, and the way you expected my love to come with utilities and no voice. He looked like a boy again then. Not a man, not a father, just someone who had taken the path of least resistance for too long and called it off. He said nothing more, and neither did I. He left, and this time I didn't watch him go. I walked back inside, turned off the porch light, because you don't need a light away for someone who never knows you. But this story isn't over. The house echoed differently once they were gone. Not loud, just hollow, like the inside shell that used to hold something. It was the absence that had broken. Not the furniture, not the rugs, but the absence of assumptions. No more shoes tossed near the door. No more handprints on the fridge I'd bought after their last one broke, and they hadn't budgeted for a new one. No more scribbled notes on the corkboard that always said things like Benjamin Dentist 2 p.m. or milk plus eggs plus ask Dad for weekend help. They were gone. I walked through each room slowly, not to reminisce, but to reckon. Reckon with the fact that everything they'd used as backdrop for their comfort had been mine. Quietly, solidly, legally. And now, for the first time, I could breathe in it without being erased inside it. I stood in what had once been the living room. The wall where the family photo had hung was blank now. A paler rectangle lingered where the sun hadn't reached behind the frame. The ghost of a picture, the outline of togetherness. They had taken the photo when they left, but I didn't need it. I had the original, the one Catherine had framed herself decades earlier when Lucas was 7, missing a front tooth, wearing a clip-on tie that never sat straight. I pulled it from a folder I'd kept in my desk drawer all these years, still wrapped in protective cloth. The frame was older, wooden, slightly scratched, but it had the weight of an object you couldn't mistake for disposable. I placed it gently on the kitchen counter, facing the front door, and beneath it, I slipped a note. 4 words, handwritten, no punctuation. This is what remained. By the time the new buyers arrived, the house was pristine. I had paid for a professional cleaner, not out of vanity, but ritual. The last act of respect for a place that had once mattered. The new owners were a young couple. School teachers, I think. Nervous, but kind. They walked through the house like it was a cathedral. Every step careful, every breath grateful. I liked them immediately. The woman noticed the framed photo. "Did you leave this by accident?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, it belongs here. For now." She nodded as if she understood something larger than what I'd said. After the papers were signed, I didn't stay long. I walked the perimeter one last time, checked the gate, touched the oak tree I'd planted when Lucas was born. Its trunk was thick now, roots deep. I'd spent hours under that tree building forts, hosting tea parties with Emma, and later hammering nails into birdhouses that never attracted a single bird, but earned plenty of praise from a 6-year-old boy who believed his dad could build anything. I didn't cry, but my throat burned the way drywood does just before it catches flame. Back home, my own house, The one-bedroom cottage Catherine and I had retired into before she passed felt smaller but more honest. Nothing in it had been taken for granted. Every drawer I opened, every mug I reached for, had been placed there by a hand that remembered me. Not out of duty, not for convenience, but because I was part of the design. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no milk, and stared out the window as rain began tapping gently on the glass. The kind of soft rain that doesn't demand attention, just presence. I thought of Emma. She called me the day the house listing went public. No judgment in her voice, just curiosity wrapped in concern. "Is this really happening?" she'd asked. And I told her yes, not out of vengeance, but necessity. "You don't throw out the fire alarm because the sound offends you," I said. "You check the wiring." She'd been quiet for a long time after that. Then she asked if we could have dinner soon. Just her and me. No agenda. I said, yes, of course. Because she'd knocked. Because she'd looked me in the eye when the others looked away. The next evening, I received a text from Lucas. Just a single line, "I saw what you left." No apology, no question. But I knew what he meant. He was talking about the photo. The rectangle on the kitchen counter. The moment frozen in time before we all drifted. He didn't ask why I left it. He knew. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe it haunted him the way truth does when it's stripped of explanation. I didn't reply. Some silences are earned, some are chosen, and some are the final mercy. 2 days later, Emma showed up at my door with a lime meringue pie, Catherine's favorite. She didn't mention the house, didn't ask about Lucas. She sat across from me and talked about work, about a book she was reading, about how she'd always loved the way our porch smelled in the rain. She wasn't pretending. She was remembering. And in that remembering, something between us healed. Not with fireworks, with warmth. Quiet warmth. The kind that doesn't announce its arrival, but stays through winter. We ate pie in silence. And I thought, this is what remains. Not the house, not the inheritance, not the title deeds or the email threads, but this. The clinking of 2 forks against ceramic. The comfort of being seen again, not as a provider, not as a relic, but as a grandfather. I asked if she wanted to walk around the garden before it got dark. She smiled and said, "Only if we stop by the rosemary bush. I want to see if it's still stubborn like you." I laughed, surprised by the sound of it. It had been a while since I'd heard my own joy. Later that night, I opened Catherine's old journal, the one she used to keep notes and scattered thoughts in. I flipped to the final page, dated just months before her diagnosis. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were sharp as ever. A man cannot make others cherish what they never built, but he can choose not to be buried under their carelessness. I read it twice, then closed the book and placed it back where it belonged, between the photo albums and the retirement papers. In the days that followed, I began to breathe differently. Slower, more grounded. I started waking up before my alarm again. The way I used to before the house became more courtroom than home. I took morning walks. I replanted the hydrangeas. I fixed the shed door that had been sticking since spring. And when I passed neighbors, I didn't look away out of habit. I nodded. I smiled. I let myself be part of the world again. Not because it needed me, but because I had remembered that I deserved to exist outside the shadows of what had gone wrong. One afternoon, I received a letter handwritten from Benjamin. "Grandpa," it began, "I miss you. I don't know why Mom and Dad are so upset, but I remember your stories and your grilled cheese sandwiches. I hope we can still do those things again." I read it 3 times, then once more aloud. His handwriting was big and uneven, words crossing each other like tree branches in a storm, but the message was steady, pure. I wrote him back. Nothing long, just a story about a turtle I'd once found in the backyard. I told him I'd saved a grilled cheese recipe just in case he visited. I didn't mention his parents. Children don't need to carry the weight of broken things they didn't break. That night, I left a porch light on. Not for Lucas, not for reconciliation, but because a boy named Benjamin might someday walk up that path again. And I wanted him to know someone had been waiting. Quietly, deliberately, with the door unlocked. But only if he knocked. It came at 3:47 in the morning. A vibration on my nightstand. I didn't open my eyes. I knew the sound. Not urgent, not a call, just an email. And I knew who it was from before I even looked. There's a tone that lingers long after a name stops being said with warmth. Lucas. When I finally opened my eyes, I didn't reach for the phone. I turned over and stared at the ceiling instead. The fan turned slowly, each rotation a quiet reminder that movement doesn't always mean progress. Some things just spin. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of what he had to say. I just didn't need it anymore. Forgiveness, perhaps, is not always something that comes with permission. Sometimes it arrives quietly on the edges of the peace. Not because the pain has vanished, but because it no longer owns the truth. By sunrise, the email was still on. I made coffee, fed the bird, sat on the porch, and watched the mist lift off the hedges of the memory. There was peace in not knowing, or perhaps peace in knowing I could know and still choose. That kind of restraint was hard. Years ago, I would have opened it before the notification finished loading. Would have read every line, dissected every syllable, searching for the apology that could return me to the version of fatherhood I once believed was possible. But that version no longer existed. It had left the moment he typed "don't come in" and hit send without hesitation. That moment had rewritten us. Not with violence, with silence. The deepest kind. The kind that settles between people who once held each other with trust. I walked to the back of the house and opened the old chest in the garage. Catherine's gardening hat still hung from the hook, the label inside faded, but her handwriting still intact. Grow gently. Even in dirt, she had found tenderness. I pulled out a stack of old letters, real ones she had written me during my deployment. The ink had smudged in places, but the emotion never faded. I reread one dated June 2nd, 1979. "You are not missing home," she wrote. "You're holding it steady with every breath you take over there. And when you return, we will meet as changed people who still choose one another." I exhaled slower than usual because in those lines, I realized Catherine had already prepared me for this. That sometimes the ones we love most will meet us only halfway, and it has to be enough. That evening, I opened my email. Not Lucas's, not yet, but another one from Emma. Subject line about Benjamin. My stomach tightened, not out of fear, but tenderness. She wrote that Benjamin had asked about me again, not in passing, but with detail. He remembered the shed, the way I carve his initials into a piece of cedar, the way I hummed Sinatra while making grilled cheese. He'd started writing about me in his school journal. Call me Grandpa Walter, the man who knows how to fix things but doesn't talk too much. I smiled because somehow in all the mess that boy had seen me. Not as a wallet, not as a burden, but as a steady thing. A compass still pointing north even when no one asked for directions. I replied to Emma's email the same night. Told her that Benjamin was always welcome any weekend, any day. I'd clear my calendar for a 7-year-old with questions about cedar or cheese or old Sinatra songs. She thanked me. And then, at the very end, she wrote, "I saw the house listing. I didn't say anything because I wanted to see what choice you'd make. I'm proud of you, Grandpa, for choosing yourself this time." I read that line twice, then again, and it landed somewhere deeper than expected. Because no one tells men like me that choosing yourself is allowed. We're trained to be bridges walked over, never rested upon. But maybe, just maybe, I had stopped being a bridge and started becoming ground. The email from Lucas remained unread for 5 more days. Not out of punishment, out of preservation. I was rebuilding, and some structures require stillness before they can bear new weight. On the 6th morning, I opened it, sat in the armchair, poured coffee, turned off the radio, and read. He started with the word "dad." That alone almost undid me because I hadn't heard it aloud in 2 years, and seeing it without venom was a shock. He wrote about the dinner, the message. Said he'd sent it quickly to avoid a scene. Said he thought it would be easier for me. Said Rachel had cried when I pulled away from the driveway that night, but not for me. for the drama of it all. He said he hadn't meant to hurt me, but didn't deny that he did. He admitted to using the house more than he honored it. Admitted he'd assumed my silence was compliance, that my lack of confrontation meant permission. You've always been quiet, he wrote, but I forgot that quiet doesn't mean blind. He mentioned the photo I left. Said Benjamin had asked who the boy with the crooked tie was. Said he'd answered honestly, "That's me." That's when I still thought my dad could fix anything. I paused there, not out of anger, but because that sentence carried both a memory and a mourning. Lucas hadn't stopped loving me. He just stopped believing in me. And in doing so, he'd become someone I didn't recognize either. He closed the email with a line that didn't ask for a response, just left the door slightly ajar. "I'm still learning how to be your son again, if there's still room for that." I stared at that sentence for a long time, because in it there was something I hadn't felt from him in years. Humility. Not groveling, not manipulation. Just the raw, uncertain hand of a man who had made mistakes and didn't know how to walk back, but wanted to. I didn't write back right away. Not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to do it right. Because some letters deserve answers not in keystrokes, but in character. Over the next few days, I thought about what it would mean to let him try again and what it would mean if I didn't. Both options carried weight. Both were forms of love, and both would leave something behind. Eventually, I replied. Just one paragraph. "I read your letter. I heard your tone, and I believe you mean it. But I'm not who I was when I stood outside that window. And maybe that's a good thing. If you want to rebuild, come by. Just you. No need for casseroles. Just your word and your time. I don't promise it will be the same, but I do promise I'll listen. If you knock." That was all. I hit send, then closed my laptop and walked outside. The porch light was already on. It was the first Saturday in March when I heard it. The knock. Not the hesitant kind, not the loud, apologetic kind either. Just 3 simple, weighted taps, as if the man on the other side wasn't asking to be let in, but merely acknowledging the presence of a door. I was in the kitchen pouring hot water over a bag of black tea, the kind Catherine used to buy in bulk from the farmer's market. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. After all, the wind had a way of knocking on that old frame whenever it shifted just right. But then came the second set of taps. Identical in rhythm, just slightly firmer. I let the steam rise past my glasses, then set the kettle down without a sound. My feet knew where to go before my thoughts did. And by the time I opened the door, he was already there. Lucas, my son, standing with both hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not from cold, but from the weight of something long carried and never named. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, they didn't flinch. They didn't search for approval. They didn't dodge my silence. They simply looked, and I looked back. He didn't say hi. I didn't say come in. We stood like that. 2 men separated by a wooden frame and years of choices, both made and unmade. Then, finally he spoke. "I parked by the oak," he said. "Didn't want to block the mailbox." It was a nothing sentence, but it held everything. Because men like us, we talk about parking when we mean pain. We mention mailboxes when we mean memory. I stepped aside. He stepped in. The door closed behind him with the kind of click that sounds like finality, but feels like a beginning. He took off his coat and hung it on the hook that used to hold Catherine's shawl. The living room was warm, the sun leaking through the old curtains and strips. I gestured toward the chair. He sat. I stayed standing, not as a power play, just a habit from years of pacing through disappointment. For a while, there was only sound. The tick of the wall clock, the soft whir of the space heater, a distant bird breaking the stillness. Then he exhaled. "I don't know how to start," he said, not looking at me. "But I've been carrying things, and they're heavy, and I think some of them might be yours." That line landed in my chest like a stone wrapped in velvet, because yes, some of them were mine, and some weren't. And the tragedy was we'd both been shouldering pieces of each other's grief without ever saying so. I pulled out a chair, finally sat down, and folded my hands away Catherine waiting for someone to finally kiss. He looked older than I remember, not just in the way his beard was gray. but in how he paused between sentences, as if measuring each word against a map had it in his ears. When Rachel said she didn't want you there that night, he began. I told her I did, and I did, badly. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't stop. She said you'd make things awkward, that you'd judge her cooking, that you'd stare. But none of that was about you. It was about me. How I hadn't defended you before. How I let little things pile up. How I stopped inviting you into the parts of my life that mattered. Not because you weren't welcome, but because I thought I'd outgrown needing you. He paused again. And then that night, when you didn't knock, something shifted. I saw the casserole dish on the porch the next morning, still warm under the foil. I knew you'd come. I knew you'd read the message, and I knew you'd left without a word. And it haunted me, not because it was silent, but because it was dignified. I let the words settle, let them take root. Then I asked one question. Why now? He looked at me for the first time with something close to softness. Because I finally realized that Benjamin's watching me the way I used to watch you. And I didn't like what he might learn. There it was. The reason beneath the reason. We don't always fix what we break for ourselves. Sometimes we do it for the ones still building their definitions of love, of manhood, of mercy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote you a letter, he said, but I didn't send it because I wanted to say it, not just write it. He held it out, but I didn't take it. Read it, I said, out loud. His hand trembled slightly, but he opened the paper, cleared his throat, and began. Dear Dad, I've hated how things have been between us. I know I let distance become easier than repair. I know I used your quietness as an excuse to stop listening. I resented your absence in rooms I never invited you into. But what I've come to understand is you were never truly gone. You were always waiting. On the porch, in the margins, in the silence I didn't bother to enter. His voice broke. He looked up. I am sorry. I'm not asking you to forget. Just let me try again. As a son, as a father to your grandson, as someone who finally understands that presence isn't loud. It's loyal. I nodded once, slowly, then stood up, walked to the kitchen, poured a second cup of tea, brought it back, and set it in front of him. He looked at it like it was a handshake. I sat back down. You forgot to write one thing, I said quietly. He looked confused. You forgot to say thank you. He blinked, then smiled. A real one, lopsided like when he was a boy and built lighthouses out of Lego. Thank you, he said. Not just for the tea, not just for the listening, but for not slamming the door when he finally knocked. We talked for another hour about nothing urgent. About birds, about Benjamin's obsession with dinosaurs, about Catherine's garden, and how the lilies were coming back early this year. He didn't stay long, but when he left, he looked back at the porch as if it meant something now. Not just an entrance, but a return. I stood there after he pulled away, tea still warm in my hand. The door was still open, and for the first time in a long while, the silence around me didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a room I had chosen to open again. The letter had been in the top drawer of my desk for 11 months and 19 days. Signed, witnessed, notarized, folded once cleanly like I've been taught in the service. Creases matter, even on things no one sees. I'd written it not out of spite, but out of clarity. The kind that only arrives after silence has stretched long enough to echo. I hadn't told Lucas. I hadn't told anyone. Because what I had changed wasn't meant to punish. It was meant to preserve. Some legacies are not about blood. They're about breath. About who stays in the room when things go quiet. About who doesn't flinch when the storm takes longer than expected. And sometimes about who brings you tea when they could have brought you questions. The Tuesday after Lucas's visit, I walked down to Carson and Tate Legal. Small building, faded awning. Same receptionist who always wore coral lipstick and smelled like peppermints. She smiled and said, "They're expecting you, Mr. Walter." I nodded, adjusted the sleeves of my jacket, and stepped into the small conference room that still had a faint scent of old leather and newer grief. Jim Tate, my lawyer of 27 years, stood and extended his hand. "Walter," he said with that kind of slow formality that men our age use only when something irreversible is about to happen. He gestured to the envelope already waiting on the table. Cream-colored, heavy paper, sealed with a red wax stamp I never asked for, but he insisted on using. "This is it?" I asked, even though I knew. "Yes," he said. "It reflects everything you dictated. It's locked, witnessed, and recorded. If you don't change it again, this is what they'll read." I sat down. Let the silence between us settle like dust on an unused shelf. I thought of Catherine, how she used to say that some truths bloom late, that a father's justice is sometimes a quiet correction, not a public sentence. I had made my decisions not in anger, but in alignment with the man I still tried to be long after no one seemed to be watching. "I want you to release it next spring," I told Jim. "After the daffodils bloom. After Benjamin turns 8. That way he'll remember it not as the year Grandpa left, but as the year something opened." Jim nodded slowly. "You sure you don't want to tell Lucas yourself?" I stared at the wax seal. Thought about the knock that came too late, but still came. "No. If he comes back again, I'll tell him. If he doesn't, the letter will." We talked logistics. Dates, trustees, a few numbers. Nothing dramatic, just clean clarity. I had left the cottage to the city. A historical designation application was already filed. Catherine loved the idea of it becoming a reading center. Quiet rooms, sunlight, the sound of pages turning instead of accusations. As for the savings, most went to a scholarship fund in her name. For older students, single parents, second chancers. The ones no one clapped for. And the rest, the part everyone always assumes they deserve. I'd left that to Benjamin. Not because he was a child, but because he was still unbroken enough to be taught. I had written one note in my hand to be read aloud when the will was executed. It said, "You may think this is unfair, but let fairness grow slowly in you. Let earn its way to your understanding." I didn't choose legacy by lineage. I chose it by listening. By the time I left the office, the sky had turned that soft gray blue that only belongs to late afternoon. I walked to the bus stop instead of calling cab. Sat on the bench. Let the wind remind me I was still breathing. An older man across from me nodded respectfully, the way veterans sometimes do without needing a word. I nodded back. The air carried the scent of rust and leaves. Change was coming, and I had stopped resisting it. That weekend, Lucas came again, this time with Benjamin. No casserole, no speech. Just a boy with wide eyes and a sketchbook, and a man still learning how to sit in his skin again. I showed Benjamin the garden, told him how Catherine used to name the roses like they were pets. He laughed at that, said he liked the yellow ones best, said they looked like the sun got stuck in the leaves. Lucas watched us from a porch. No camera, no interruptions. Just watching. At one point, Benjamin asked, "Grandpa, how do you know what to leave behind?" I knelt, picked up a fallen petal, and held it between two fingers. You leave behind what you'd want someone to find when they need hope more than history. He blinked, nodded, then went back to drawing. Lucas stayed behind after Benjamin went inside. We didn't talk about the will. We didn't talk about the house. We just sat until finally he said, "You changed, Dad." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped hiding the parts of you." He swallowed hard. "You always seemed like you didn't need me." I looked at him, really looked, and said, "I needed you to believe in something inside me." That landed me. I saw it, and he didn't run from it. He simply nodded. A grown man understanding something too late, but not refusing it. As the sun dipped behind the plates, I handed him the envelope. Not the will, but something else. A photo of him at 10, holding a kite, laughing. Catherine's handwriting on the back. "This is who he is. Remind him when he forgets." He stared at it for a long time, then put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he whispered. And this time it wasn't for tea. When they left that evening, I stood by the window and watched the car pull away. Not out of loneliness, but because closure deserves witnesses. I didn't write another will after that. I didn't need to. I had written myself back into the story I thought had ended. Not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a man who refused to let silence define him. And when the time came, and the letter was finally read, and and the house keys handed not to the expected, but to the earned, I wasn't there. But I didn't need to be, because by then, they'd already seen the real inheritance. A man who chose justice over resentment, truth over ego, and silence not as a punishment, but as a doorway back to decency. The next morning, I took a walk through the neighborhood, past the park where I used to push Lucas on the swing, past the corner store where I once bought 3 gallons of milk a week for growing grandkids, past the homes that looked identical from the outside but held entirely different storms within. And somewhere in that walk, I realized that the past isn't something that visits you. It's something you carry. And mine had grown too heavy to keep shouldering for people who refused to lift a finger. I came back home, made tea, and sat by the window, watching the wind play through the leaves like it was composing something only the trees could hear. Then I opened my journal again and wrote. Every act of silence I gave them was a blank check. I've stopped signing. A few months later, I got a call from Jim. The will had been executed according to my instructions. Emma received her inheritance with tears of gratitude. Benjamin's trust fund was established, along with a letter explaining that love and money were different currencies, and only one of them earned compound interest. Lucas received exactly what the law required. Nothing more, nothing less. The Veterans Education Fund received the largest portion, along with a plaque that read, "In memory of Catherine Harrison, who believed that wisdom was the only wealth worth leaving behind." Jim told me Lucas had stood in his office for 20 minutes after the reading, not saying a word, just staring at the papers like they were written in a language he was still learning to read. Rachel, apparently, had words, many of them, but words without foundation crumble quickly, and by the time she finished speaking, the documents were already filed, the decisions already sealed. Emma called me that evening, not to thank me for the money, but to tell me she understood. "You didn't just leave me an inheritance, Grandpa. You left me a lesson about knowing your worth." Benjamin's trust came with one condition. He could only access it after writing me a letter every year until he turned 18, not asking for anything, just telling me who he was becoming. The first one arrived on his 9th birthday. "Dear Grandpa Walter, I'm learning to build things with my hands like you taught me. Dad says you were brave. I want to be brave too. I still have the piece of cedar with my name on it. Love, Benjamin." I framed that letter and hung it next to Catherine's garden photo. Some evenings, Lucas stops by. Not often, but regularly. We don't talk about the money or the will or the year. Everything changed. We talk about Benjamin's Little League games, about Emma's job, about the weather and the roses and the way the porch light catches the moths. He doesn't apologize anymore because we've moved past apology into something deeper. Understanding. The kind that doesn't require words, just presence. Sometimes he brings Benjamin, and we work in the shed together, 3 generations of Harrison men who are finally learning that building something takes time, patience, and the willingness to start over when the foundation isn't right. Rachel doesn't come. I don't expect her to. Some bridges, once burned, leave ashes that are better left undisturbed. But Emma visits every few weeks, usually with questions about Catherine's recipes or stories about college, or just the need to sit somewhere that remembers her childhood without trying to monetize it. Last month, she brought her boyfriend, a quiet young man who shook my hand firmly and asked intelligent questions about the garden. After they left, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Grandpa, thank you for showing me what it looks like when someone chooses dignity over drama. I'm going to marry him. I wanted you to be the first to know. Love, Emma." I called her that night and told her I was proud, not of her choice in partners, though he seemed fine, but of her choice to choose it all, to claim her own life instead of waiting for permission. The house where they used to live is now home to the school teachers. They send me a Christmas card every year with photos of their children playing in the backyard where Benjamin once learned to ride a bike. There's something poetic about that. New laughter in old spaces, fresh stories written over faded ones. Sometimes I drive by, not to reminisce, but to remind myself that places like people can have second chances. The swing set is still there, still hosting joy, just different joy. I keep the original photo on my mantle now, the one of 7-year-old Lucas with a crooked tie, not as a monument to what was lost, but as evidence of what was real before it got complicated. Beside it sits a newer photo, Benjamin and me in the shed, both of us wearing safety glasses, both of us grinning like we just solved the world's most important puzzle, which in a way we had. The secret to being a grandfather, I've learned, isn't giving everything you have. It's giving everything you are. And sometimes that means taking back what you've given to people who confuse your generosity with their entitlement, so you can offer it properly to those who understand that love is not a transaction. It's a gift that appreciates with gratitude, not interest rates. These days I sleep better, not because the house is quieter, but because my conscience is clearer. I chose truth over peace, and in doing so, I found both. The porch light still glows every evening, not as a beacon for the lost, but as a welcome for the found. For Emma when she needs advice. For Benjamin when he needs stories. For Lucas when he needs forgiveness, which he's learning to give himself. And sometimes, just sometimes, I sit in Catherine's old chair and feel her approval settle around my shoulders like a shawl. She would have liked how this story ended. Not with revenge, but with reclamation. Not with bitterness, but with boundaries. Well done, I imagine her saying. You finally learned the difference between being used and being useful. The casserole dish sits in my cupboard now, waiting for the next occasion worth celebrating. And there will be one. Because a man who knows his worth doesn't run out of reasons to share it with people who know theirs. The rosemary bush outside my kitchen window grows wild and stubborn, just like its gardener. And every time I trim it, I remember that some things need cutting back to grow properly. Some relationships, too. This is Walter Harrison, signing off from a life reclaimed, a dignity restored, and a legacy finally written by the right hand. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever stood outside your own house holding warmth that nobody wanted, remember this. You are not furniture in someone else's story. You are the author of your own, and it's never too late to pick up the pen. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to miss you. Hit that subscribe button if this story touched your heart, and share it with anyone who needs to remember that respect is earned, not inherited. Because the best revenge isn't getting, it's getting free.